Hi and welcome to the Kind Community Sustainability Podcast. I'm your host, Gianna Velli, and on the show we uncover the stories, tactics and skills of people doing great things for the planet and turn their experiences into practical advice that you can use to impact your own life and those around you.
Our primary aim is to make the sustainable attainable through education, transparency and collaboration. Did you know that around 120 billion units of packaging are produced every year by the global cosmetics industry? Much of that isn't recyclable. Recycle Now campaign points to its recent statistics that show that while 90% of us recycle packaging in our kitchens, only half of that is being recycled in the bathroom. In today's episode, you'll hear our conversation with Claudia Gwinnutt, founder of Circla. Claudia started Circla after being fed up with the single-use plastic in her daily routine and the lack of options in her lifestyle. The company aims to reduce single-use packaging waste from your daily routine by making the most responsible choice the convenient choice. They only work with environmentally friendly, ethical brands from the UK and deliver on bicycles and EVs to ensure the lowest possible carbon footprint. Finally, when you finish with the products, they'll replenish your products and they'll collect the empties to be washed and refilled again and again, helping you break up with unnecessary single-use plastic. Thanks for joining me today, Claudia.
Hi, it's so great to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
My pleasure. So firstly, I'd love to know I love how you use the phrase, the milkman reimagined for beauty. How did you come up with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I started Circla and, this idea of kind of reusing packaging, we're not really doing anything technically that innovative. These are actually, the milk model is, it's super traditional. It's been around for years. Depending how old everyone is, your grandparents, was probably definitely that's the way that their milk was delivered. And obviously recently they've become, a lot more popular, and there's kind of some new companies that have come out like Milk and More and the Modern Milkmen who've kind of focused on kind of food. And when I was looking at a very simple way to describe Circla, to really kind of make sure that a customer could understand it in like kind of 2 seconds immediately what it did. The milkman model obviously refers to this idea of kind of picking up and replacing packaging. And obviously we've just taken that traditional model and, reimagined it for beauty products. And it just felt like a very easy way to explain it to a customer group.
Can you tell us a bit more about the defining moment that made you start Circla?
Yeah, so my background was kind of not in the beauty industry, or actually in, coming from a sustainability type background. I actually worked in financial services for about 10 years. And, I had this moment where I kind of looked at, kind of combined with what I was doing and feeling slightly unfulfilled in what I was doing. And it felt very detached from some of my own personal values. And at the same time, and this was about 2 years ago when I kind of first started thinking about the kind of concept of Circla. You had obviously just had this kind of huge blue planet, kind of David Attenborough effect that was kind of sweeping the nation, well, the world really. And it really made me stop and think about my own consumption patterns. And I realized, wow, I actually kind of consume quite mindlessly. I'm not really aware or think about what happens to all that packaging. I was generally quite conscious in what I was buying potentially, but, I would put this stuff in the bin and, I just kind of had this belief, I guess, that it was, getting recycled. I didn't have any idea how broken the recycling infrastructure was, not just here in the UK, but actually all around the world. And as I actually just became more educated, I started looking for businesses that were doing, I guess, something like Circla or options available. And everything that kind of came about just seemed not really to fit with my lifestyle. It was either really expensive, that you had to kind of sacrifice on the quality of the product. And then the biggest thing was that they were all just kind of really inconvenient. And it was really through that kind of personal journey that kind of led me to realize that actually there's a market opportunity but also this is just something I would want in my life and I would use. And that felt like the kind of perfect reason, I guess, to kind of quit your job and jump into the startup world.
So I mentioned that about 50% of bathroom packaging and plastics don't actually end up being recycled. Why do you think that is?
So I think for a lot of people, I think the recycling stats for just your bathroom products is generally because in the kitchen, people tend to have a recycling bin and a maybe general rubbish bin. So you're more likely, let's say, if you've finished, I don't know, your milk or something like that, you're more likely to be like, oh, this can be recycled, and the recycling bin's kind of quite close to you. Whereas in your bathroom, people tend to have quite a small little rubbish bin, and that's already just a show of like kind of how little inconvenience we might place into our lives and how we consume stuff. So you kind of just throw it away in there, and then when you're emptying out your bins, you just kind of, no one really wants to sort through that, so they just kind of dump it away. But I think the actual bigger problem is not, and this is something I've always been really frustrated about, is not really the focus on consumers, but actually, even if you did everything correctly, so let's say you were one of those people who avidly recycled all their stuff and make sure it went into the right bin, the actual issue is that the recycling infrastructure is just not set up to handle that much waste, and it's not developed enough to deal with all the different types of waste that we have. So even if you do the whole process properly, the chances are your waste isn't even going to get recycled. So if we think of a lot of beauty products which are packaged in plastic and generally quite hard to recycle plastic, so there's pumps and components and pipettes and all sorts of things, the chances are that actually, even if you did it correctly, it won't even get recycled. So I mean, there's a very harrowing statistic that about only 9% of plastic ever made has been recycled. And I think, that was one of the founding reasons, why I started Circla, because it was not a case of telling people to recycle more. It was fundamentally changing, the way that we use and throw away those products and making sure that we reuse them rather than just promoting people to recycle more.
Wow. What has been, or perhaps still are, some of the biggest challenges faced when ensuring sustainable practices are an integral part of your business decisions?
Yeah, I know I'm in a really good network of kind of sustainable companies, and we talk about this a lot because there is when you're starting out, there is a lot of things that sometimes small businesses don't have access to having the best sustainable practices because you are small. So for example, I always want to work with kind of British suppliers to make sure that we're buying kind of locally, so it's not being, transported all over the place. But sometimes you unfortunately just can't work with the supplier that you want to because their minimum order quantity is like 10,000 units of something, and you only need a couple of hundred. And I think there's this kind of fine balance between letting these businesses start, which are trying to be sustainable and do something, but this kind of understanding that they're not perfect from day one, but as long as they kind of stick to their philosophy, there's a kind of journey towards being truly sustainable that they're going to go on. So, I've definitely struggled with that. It has meant, we've tended to, like, I think 90% of our suppliers are British. And a lot of the time it's also just meant that we move a bit slower because that just requires a whole lot of extra work to research, negotiate, when it would have probably been easier to be like, oh, I'll just order this on Amazon or something like that, or, get it from China. So I think that balance of, doing right by the planet and having a minimal impact, but also growing and being scalable is probably one of the biggest, a very big challenge that we definitely face.
So switching to reusable coffee cups, taking reusable bags to the grocery store, swapping household items, green alternatives, feels like a band-aid solution to the irreversible damage that plastics already have created. That often leads to feelings of disempowerment because the scale of the actions don't match up with the enormity of the problem. As individuals, what would be your advice in tackling the war on plastics? What other things can we be doing?
Yeah, I mean, so my first advice is that I hope that people don't feel discouraged. It obviously can feel like such a drop in the ocean. You're like, oh, here I am with my reusable coffee cup, but actually, I read this article last year on reusable coffee cups, and I'm sure nearly everyone owns one. But the reality is, I mean, this is pre-pandemic. So I think this data came from 2019, that it was still something like 2% of coffee, only 2% of coffee in the UK was being sold in reusable cups. And then when you add in how much energy has gone into producing reusable coffee cups, I mean, I must have 6 at home from various events and things that, I went to and stuff. And generally they're quite intensive materials, they're made of glass, and it's actually takes more energy to make. So there's this kind of really complex problem, and sustainability is complex. But if I take a step back from the complexity of it, I think as consumers, one of the biggest power you have is what you spend your money with. And whilst it can feel really you're kind of walking through treacle a little bit, because the scale of the problem is so big. I think there's this quote that someone said, 8 billion straws, one straw, said someone, but times that by 8 billion people, which is on the planet. And actually, if everyone was doing these small changes, they can really add up to a huge amount of, progress and change. So we really advocate, and it's kind of at the core of our philosophy at Circla, which is around kind of small, sustainable changes. And when I mean sustainable, things that people can do, all the time, that are easy to implement in their life, and kind of small swaps that if everyone did, they could have a huge impact. In terms of other changes, I think some of the big things for me, which can lead to a huge change, is checking your energy supplier, things like your pension, quite boring stuff compared to like getting a really nice coffee cup, but actually can really have a huge impact. So making sure that your pension and who your money is being invested with is in companies that you kind of believe in, and a little bit of research can go a long way. I think the next best thing for me is the sustainability movement has also driven a lot of people to feel like they need to buy new stuff. And actually the best thing you can do is already use what you have at home. Recently there's been this explosion in bamboo toothbrushes, but if you already own an electric toothbrush, keep using that. That's by far the best thing than throwing that away, which, it can't be recycled. The same with clothes. So I would just promote a more mindful kind of consumption, but not deprive yourself of the things that you love.
Conscious buying decisions, and then maybe not even buying something if you don't need to, right? Have a think about it before you go into it. What would you like other companies to learn from Circla?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, I would love people to learn is when I started Circla, the biggest thing that people said to me was, operationally, you're never going to be able to implement this return process. So they call it kind of reverse logistics. So if you think about how we all get our products delivered online, a courier will deliver it to you, and you unpackage it, you put that packaging in the bin. And what we've done at Circla is obviously that packaging kind of goes into, let's call it a Circla bin, which we come and pick up. And I look at so many companies, like meal kit delivery companies, to me, like the likes of Gusto, and I can't think of the other guys' names now, but, I think they're doing a great thing, because actually food waste is a ginormous problem, and kind of giving people only the ingredients that they need really stops food waste. But like anyone knows who's used any of those services, it comes in an enormous amount of single-use packaging. And what I would love for these, for these companies to start looking at is, how can they take responsibility and accountability for that packaging? How could it be returned? How could it be reused? It's the same with like Deliveroo, which obviously so convenient. How would we have all survived the last year without kind of takeaways, having a kind of respite from the dishwasher? But at the same time, that's a huge amount of packaging. And there are companies that are launching. There's a company in East London called Dabadrop, and they actually pick up your takeaway packaging and reuse it. So I think looking at not being so afraid of what could look quite complex initially, but actually can have a huge impact, and taking responsibility for the packaging and the impact you have on the planet, and not leaving it with the consumer, is my biggest message to other companies.
Where do you take inspiration from? Like, which companies, which leaders do you most admire?
Yeah, I mean, I take inspiration from, lots of different places. I really am kind of in awe of lots of companies who are particularly working in the kind of reusable, space in particular. So the first, someone who, I'm really, really obsessed with, there's a company in the US called Blue Land. They were one of the first companies to kind of revolutionize, I guess, the cleaning industry by making sure that you get concentrated tabs sent to you over, actually 90% of cleaning products is made of water, and you have water at home, so they just kind of send you these tabs, and they've actually created a really high performing quality product that also looks really great and that people want. So those are the kind of people that I take huge inspiration from. Dame in the UK, I think, is kind of, absolutely up there. I think they're a fantastic brand doing incredible things. And they've taken, what they do, they've obviously got this whole reuse element around their kind of applicators, but also linked it to kind of being huge campaigners for women and, period poverty in the UK. So companies who link, who go so beyond just what they're trying to do, but link it into kind of further mission work. I'm always deeply inspired by them.
What's next for you? What are you most worried about, and what are you most hopeful for?
So what I'm most worried about, I think we've got some big changes happening to Circla this year. So kind of big development stuff. And I'll be interested to see how that lands with customers. So we're redesigning our packaging, and it's just scary stuff that I'm not personally, as a founder, I'm always nervous about, because it's always new and that's always scary. I think what I'm most hopeful for is, I launched Circla in November of last year, and it has just grown so quickly over the last few months. We started out with 8 brands. By the end of May, we're going to have nearly 30 brands on the platform. So the response from brands to be involved, from customers has been amazing. So I'm so excited about being able to expand across London, have all these new brands on board. And just kind of continue to grow and continue to have an impact.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Claudia. This is the quick fire round, so try and answer as quickly as possible. What does sustainability mean to you?
Sustainability means to me is making decisions that have a minimal impact on the planet and its resources.
What's the best business book you've read?
I can't think of the name, but it is not a business book, but I think it's called The Green Dilemma. I can follow up with you afterwards. Oh, it's actually right next to me. So it's called Is It Really Green? And it's an amazing book by Melissa Hensley. Highly, highly recommend it.
What's your favorite sustainable hack?
It is definitely reusing old clothes for kind of tea towels and cleaning cloths around the house.
I love that one. What would be one bit of advice you would give your younger 20-year-old self?
Be a bit more patient. It will all work out in the end.
I think that's one bit of advice I'd give myself as well. Claudia, thanks so much. Please tell us where we can connect with you, Circla, and how can listeners support you?
Yeah, definitely. So if you are based in London, obviously, please come and, switch to refills with us. You can find us online. We're at www.circla.co.uk. We're also on Instagram with Circla, but with an underscore. If you are based in central London, I'm more than happy to also offer everyone in the Kind community a little discount. So just use welcome15 all in capitals, and you'll get 15% off your first order.
Oh, thank you so much for that offer. Welcome15 all in capitals.
Yep.
Great stuff. Thanks, Claudia. Really appreciate it. Thanks for sharing more about what you're doing, and bye for now.
No, thank you so much. Cheers. Thank you.
If you're inspired by my conversation with Claudia, please remember to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with anyone that you think would love to join our community. And remember to live what you listen and to put into action what you have learned today, because knowledge isn't power, it's potential power. And you have to use that knowledge for it to be powerful. Together, we can make the sustainable attainable. I'm Giannavelli, and this is the Kind Community Show.